Welcome to my first ever Frictionless Mastery question and answer video. Today I'll be answering a set of thoughtful and intelligent questions from reader Tom in Beijing, China. Question 1. When preparing a cheat sheet, should I use a language course book as the foundation and simply summarize the course material in my cheat sheet? Or should I aim directly for the target? For example, search online for how to say all the pronouns, prepositions, etc. in the foreign language without even using a textbook. A couple things to say. First of all, just finding translations for individual words is not enough. There's not enough information contained in translations to understand how the language works. A course book, however, will give you sample phrases. It will indicate whether the language has declensions, conjugations, genders, etc., and will give you a broad overview of how the language works, if it's a good course book. So you need either a paper course back, a course book for beginners, or the equivalent online. However, as you're building your cheat sheet, keep in mind the end goal. The end goal is to have a cheat sheet with between 300 and 350 words, which are the most commonly used universal words in the language, allowing you to talk about a variety of simple things in the language. So as you're going through your course book, you'll find that sometimes they introduce material that really shouldn't be in your cheat sheet at this point. Maybe it's advanced vocabulary that you don't need. So use my sample cheat sheet in the instruction manual as your guide, and pay attention to all the things in the early chapters of your course book that are relevant to the cheat sheet, and pick those out. Things that are clearly not for your cheat sheet, just skip past those for now. Question 2. About the frictionless mastery algorithm. Do the questions in step 2 mean that I note down all the things which I'm not sure of, get corrected, and are easy for me to learn right now? So, for reference, let's review those 3 frictionless mastery questions. 1. Am I sure that what I just said is correct? 2. Could I have said what he or she just said? And 3. Will this word, expression, grammatical form, etc. be easy for me to remember and start using now? So the third question is most central. Anything you write down in your language notebook to be recorded, to make a voice recording of, must be material that is going to be easy for you to remember and start using immediately. So there are a couple different sources for this material. This could be something you're not sure of. You say it, but you realize as you're saying this that you're not sure you said that 100% correctly. And afterwards, or maybe in the process, you look it up, check it. If you're using a dictionary on your smartphone, you make a quick screenshot that you can refer to later. Another source of this material is something that someone else said that you understand perfectly, but wouldn't have been able to say in those same words yourself. And finally, corrections that other people give you. So those are your sources of material. But no matter what you write down, it must satisfy the third question, which determines whether you'll even be able to learn the material frictionlessly or not. Now, what are these questions all about? Because this is really the essence, for me, of frictionless learning. The key is that we want to find material that is right on the edge of our circle of command. So from the instruction manual, you know that there are 2 circles of vocabulary development. So here, if the square is the entire vocabulary of a foreign language, this inner circle here is our circle of command, what we can actually use correctly in our active speech. This next circle is our circle of familiarity. This is everything that we are aware of in a foreign language. Maybe you half recognize the word, or maybe you understand a statement entirely, but you wouldn't have been able to say that yourself. Or maybe this is a grammar that you've learned to some degree, but when it comes to using it, you tend to make mistakes. So, these questions, these frictionless mastery questions, serve to identify material that is right here on the fringes of our circle of command. So, we don't want to jot down things that are out here, of course. This is, for example, when you're at if you're at a language lesson and your teacher says, "Hey everyone, write down this new word. It's very important." You've never heard the word before. That means it's outside of your circle of familiarity here. And you could try to remember it, but of course it will take far more effort to remember and begin using this material than something that you've already heard before numerous times. You've begun to understand it yourself, but you're not yet to the point where you'd be able to integrate that into your own speech. So that's the sort of things we want to write down, and that's what these frictionless mastery questions are about. Okay, next question. The crucial problem is, when can I note these things down? Will writing during conversation interrupt the flow, or should I hold it in my mind and write it down as soon as the conversation ends? Well, it really depends on the type of conversation you're having. One situation is a language club or conversation coach. In this case, you can just jot down your notes right in the middle of conversation. This is something to be expected. If you're having a Skype conversation with a conversation coach, then usually they will write down things in the chat box for you to use later. However, also take your own notes and filter the notes that they give you for your own note processing, because what they write down for you is not necessarily the material that is right on the edge of your circle of command. Only you can determine that. Now, if you're, for example, riding in a taxi and the driver said something and you realize, I understand that, I know all the words, and I understand the grammar, but I wouldn't have been able to say that myself. You can take out your smartphone and make a note on your smartphone. These days, we're so used to people pulling out their smartphones that we don't even register this as being an interruption to the flow of conversation. Now, if you're having just a regular, everyday conversation with a native, for example, a friend or someone at the someone at the supermarket, I don't know, some random person, obviously you're not going to pull out your note cards and make a note in the middle of that conversation. So, train your short-term memory. Try to make a mental note of some things that you heard or maybe said, or questions you had during that conversation, and afterwards jot down as many of them as you can remember from the conversation. This is great training for your short-term memory. Now, next question. What if my conversation partner doesn't correct me? For example, if I just use the same simple vocabulary instead of using a more precise choice of words. There's a good chance my conversation partner won't correct me because what I said was technically correct and they understood me. What should I do then? This question is really about self-directed learning in general. And let's broaden the question to, what if no one corrects me? Now, if you rely only on other people's corrections, then you're not really a self-directed learner. You're lacking a connection to your inner sense of vocabulary mastery. And this is really critical. Remember, there are 3 sources of material for language notes. What you say, what other people say, and corrections you're given. So, you can become totally fluent in a foreign language and speak excellently with excellent grammar, even if nobody corrects you, as long as you are listening carefully to what other people say and making note of the things that you say yourself which you're not sure of. Then you go back home or wherever you are, pull out your dictionary, pull out some other language resource, check it, find the answer, and process that material using the Frictionless Mastery algorithm. Next question. When making a voice recording, which is step 6 of the Frictionless Mastery algorithm, should I just read the target language or include a translation or instructions for myself? For example, sich verlassen auf jemanden, to rely on someone. So is that how a language note should sound when making a voice recording? To answer this question, I just like to read some samples from my own language notebook, also in German because I'm a student of the German language. And I'll just read these right now as if I were making a voice recording, so you can get an idea. However, my explanations for other languages are almost always in Russian, so I will have to translate them into English as I'm going. So, this is what it would sound like. Die wechseln alle paar Jahre. They switch every few years. Einverstanden, aber I agree, but fortsetzen, continue. Anderthalb does not decline. In anderthalb Jahren. Bewerbung, application, die Anzeige, announcement on Facebook, in the newspaper, and so forth. Das ist meine Leidenschaft, passion. So that should give you an idea. For some notes, you might not even need any explanation or translation at all, because as you hear it, you know exactly why you wrote that, you jotted that down. In other cases, if it's just a single word, yeah, maybe you want that translation. In other cases, it'll be something grammatical, like what I noted here. Anderthalb does not decline. And so I give a sample phrase. I don't need to translate the sample phrase. So this this comes from your own intuition. Okay, should I listen to my audio recordings according to a certain schedule? Is there a suggested interval, or should I listen to the recording whenever I want? Ideally, you'd be listening to your language notes every single day, or at least 3 times a week. The rest depends on your personality, how impulsive or regimented a person are you, and how much time you're spending on a particular language per week in total. So, for example, if your language learning process is very minimalistic, you're spending about 1 hour a week speaking, 20 minutes processing your language notes, and 5 minutes in pronunciation training. So that's a language learning process of 1 hour, 25 minutes taken out of your schedule on a weekly basis, not counting passive exposure. So, with that sort of language learning process, you might want to listen to your language notes 3 times a week for 5 minutes. That's probably perfect. Now, if your language learning process is 10 times as intense, so 10 hours speaking per week, then maybe you'll need to listen about 20 minutes per day. Now, it gets complicated with multiple languages. In my case, I speak 8 foreign languages, and at any given moment, a number of these are more active than others. Some are higher priority than others, and those are the ones that I want to make sure I'm listening to my language notes for every day. So, as an example, what do I do with my Georgian voice recordings? I'm doing lots of different things during the day. With other languages, I use Russian actually more than I use Georgian, and so forth. But Georgian is very important to me, and I have a habit, a rule, that when I leave my apartment and walk down to the bus stop, which is 4 or 5 minutes away, during this time I listen to my Georgian voice recordings. So, I recommend making this a daily habit, or at least 3 times a week. Okay, how should I deal with vocabulary during the process of gaining language familiarity? Is it okay to just write down the new words and expressions and look them up and nothing more? Is the reason I don't add them to my vocabulary notebook and make a voice recording because I don't have a strong demand for these words? Okay, let's remember our criteria for adding material to our vocabulary notebook and making a voice recording. Anything that is easy to remember and start using immediately. The issue with passive language exposure is that we lack a direct physical experience of this material, and so it's harder to judge what is at the edge of our circle of command from what we pick up during passive exposure. So I personally prefer to wait until something comes up in conversation where I have a tangible physical experience related to vocabulary before entering it into my notebook. But in my instruction manual, I say that you will be tempted to write down some of this material in your vocabulary notebook. And if you do so, just make sure that you're absolutely certain that this material you will be able to remember and start using easily. So, during passive exposure, yes, you should look up words if you have the time. Yes, you should take notes if you have the time. These are all things that make passive exposure a bit more active. However, there should be a pretty high bar, a pretty high threshold for adding any new vocabulary, grammar, etc. to your vocabulary notebooks that you're going to be recording. So, looking up words is great. This is good. This brings material closer to your circle of command. But the key is to learn to tell just how close you are to mastering something. So, thinking back to our charts of our circles of vocabulary development. During passive exposure, you're probably hearing things that are totally unfamiliar, things that are a bit familiar, things that you already know and have mastered, and things that are somewhere in between. You understand that fully, but maybe wouldn't have been able to say that yourself. So, no matter what we're doing with a language, to make a voice recording of our language notes, we need to be certain that a particular entry really is right on the edge of our circle of command. Otherwise, it will take too much effort to remember and begin using, and it's simply a waste of time. Okay. How do I deal with material I don't understand during shadowing or passive exposure? Should I just focus on the part I understand, or listen to the material again and again to try to fully digest the content and new vocabulary? Here the answer is whatever most engages your brain. If material is too hard, you will have low engagement and it will take too much effort, too much discipline to really get into the material and learn something from it. So, if you're in the mood for repetition, then listen to a recording multiple times. Otherwise, don't. If all you have is difficult material at your disposal, then yes, listen to it multiple times. I have experience doing this during my first few months learning Russian while I was in the US. But today, with the internet and podcasts and all the different resources that are out there, there's really no good reason, I think, to spend your time listening to material that is far more difficult than your actual proficiency level. So, if you have a choice, look for material appropriate to your current level. Now, during conversation practice, is it advisable to prepare some kind of discussion topic? For example, I just attended a summer course in Berlin and could talk about that, or perhaps some political issues. Should I prepare by looking at vocabulary or planning what I want to say? This is not critical. It depends on your personal preferences and the type of conversation practice. And also, it depends on your level, your proficiency level relative to the other people you're talking with. It is useful, however, to have an idea of things you can share that would be of interest to others, and of course that are interesting to yourself. But if you plan too much, your discussion could turn into a boring monologue or lecture, and other people will lose interest. Now, I want us to address here some general issues of balancing study and application, because there are several questions here that talk about preparation and personal study. So I want to make clear that all preparation is good. It helps you improve your skills. It moves material closer to your circle of command. However, if you were to do all the preparation that you're talking about in these questions, what would happen? Your balance of study and application would be disrupted. So, imagine you have an upcoming conversation that's going to be 1 hour long. And because you've got plenty of time, you spend 1 hour preparing for it. You look up vocabulary, you make notes, you plan out your probable conversation topics. Now, this preparation you're doing is building potentially creating a backlog of half-learned material. And this is what you want to avoid in order to learn in a frictionless way. So imagine that you have 1 hour of conversation practice and you spent 1 hour preparing for it. That's 2 hours spent. Wouldn't your time have been spent better if you'd spent, let's say, 15 minutes preparing and 1 hour 45 minutes conversing? So, same amount of time spent, but different results. A lot of people have the tendency to want to study too much. When you study too much, you build a backlog. You artificially inflate your circle of familiarity while your circle of command lags behind. When this occurs, you have this feeling like, there's all that material that I really need to go and finish learning. Or I don't speak as well as I know I can. And this often prompts people to go back and study even more, when actually the solution is the opposite. Study less, study only what comes up in actual conversation practice, prepare less, and speak more. And there's at some proportion of study and application, there is a perfect balance where you are getting the most possible out of your time spent using and learning a foreign language. Okay, next question. I am not really a chatty person and am a bit introverted. Do you have some suggestions to keep the conversation lively for a couple of hours, considering that conversation is the cornerstone of this system? Okay, the best language learning results are achieved by people who've developed both their introverted and their extroverted side. Of course, extroversion is needed to be able to connect with other people, to quickly determine their interests, to find the right thing to say to them. However, there's a huge component of mastery that is introverted, namely the process of asking yourself the frictionless mastery questions. Could I have said what he just said? Am I totally sure that what I said is correct? And do I understand why I've been given this correction? That's one part of the introverted aspect of language learning. The other part is you come back home and you study, you process these notes, and you do pronunciation training. These are arguably all activities well suited for introverts. However, if your goal is to be able to communicate in a foreign language, then communication needs to be the bulk of your language learning process. Now you ask, keep the conversation lively for a couple of hours. That's a long time. When is this realistically going to happen? Perhaps at a language exchange club? But in that case, you're going to be talking to a bunch of different people for much shorter periods of time. or there may be group discussions every now and then that last for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. But it's actually quite rare that you just sit down with someone and have a conversation for many hours. When working with a conversation coach, I recommend that beginners spend between 5 and 20 minutes at a time. Later you might work that up to 60 minutes. But instead of thinking about a few hours, think about what you can talk about for 10 or 20 minutes to hold other people's attention. But don't just talk about your interests, show interest in the other person as well. And here I would like to refer you to the section on engaging with other people in Chapter 6 of the instruction manual. Last question. It seems that there's no language club in Beijing, China, and I intend to found one. Could you give me some suggestions, especially basic principles? This is a terrific idea. This is a great chance to bring together people who speak the foreign language you're interested in, and to give yourself many more opportunities to use this language than you would otherwise have. First of all, look at the video we made about how the Tbilisi Language Exchange Club is set up. And you can find that under the Frictionless Mastery YouTube account or channel. Now, if I were in your position, or if I just moved to Beijing, let's say, how would I go about setting up a language exchange club? So here's what I would do. I get on websites like Couchsurfing. I do a search for people in Beijing who speak German. Let's start with German here because I know you're a German speaker. Who speak German at an intermediate or advanced level. I would send personal invitations to each of these people to attend a German club, the first German club meeting, at a specific time and place that I've already decided on myself. Now, I wouldn't write to beginners because for the moment, at least, it's important to get those intermediate and advanced speakers at your language club. People who are already able to hold a conversation in that language. Later, if beginners start coming, that's fine, just as long as there's a balance between advanced, intermediate, and early stage speakers. So, how to find a venue? You need a central location with not too loud background music, not too noisy, but also you don't want a place that's silent like a library, because in this type of environment, people don't feel comfortable speaking. They want to whisper to each other, and this is not conducive to language mastery. You really need to be able to use your normal voice in speaking to others. So find a place that has a little bit of noise, but not too much, and is located in a central location, and has enough seating, or you can move tables together or something, for the expected number of people. In Tbilisi we prefer cafes, but in some cities around the world it's possible to meet at, I don't know, a school or some institute or cultural center. But in any case, you need the same conditions. Not too much noise, tables that can be moved together. Another point is that long and narrow tables are better than round tables. The reason is that they tend to break conversation up into a bunch of one-on-one dialogues, or conversations in small groups of 3 to 5 people. When you have a single round table, people are sitting around the periphery of the table, staring at each other. And if a conversation develops, it tends to be group conversation, which gives people less opportunity to practice their language, and discussion tends to be on more general topics that are less engaging to individual members. So I would just go to Beijing. I would find a suitable venue, choose the time and place, maybe something like Thursday evening at 7:30. I would go on Couchsurfing, do a search for all the German speakers with an intermediate or advanced level, send them personal invitations, and then show up at the meeting place 15 minutes in advance. That is how I would start a language club. I would start with one language, then I would begin slowly adding others. And this is exactly what I did in Tbilisi, Georgia. So I know it can be done. Final words. Tom writes, I really enjoy your manual. It's a brilliant system for language mastery. I will also buy the full-length book to get a deeper understanding of this method. Tom, this is great to hear. I'm glad that people like you find this method useful, and I wish you success in your language mastery journey. Thank you very much.